This is a Local 24 News special presentation. Untold Stories, a look at local Black history. Here are your hosts, John Paul and Kelsey Cairns.
And welcome into Untold Stories, a feast of facts about local Black history. The Mid-South has a rich civil rights past, and we're digging deep to share stories rarely discussed. I'm John Paul.
And I'm Kelsey Cairns. During the next 30 minutes, we're going to take you to the root of fight for rights, the struggles, triumphs, and historic marks left behind. We begin with a part of Black history that is often less talked about and in some cases forgotten: Black health care.
After the Civil War, former enslaved Africans were not allowed in most hospitals and often denied medical education. Local 24 News reporter Brittany Moncrief shows us how many medical schools came to be and eventually ended.
Everything comes full circle. 3 different generations in a cycle of intellect, change, and hope. Have you ever heard about Hannibal Medical College or the University of West Tennessee?
No, I didn't.
Memphis natives Juanita Shields and Mary Mitchell studied nursing in the 1950s.
When we were in training, John Gaston Hospital was where only the blacks could go there.
They would tell me to try to put me in my place on how to act like a Negro nurse, and I wouldn't take it.
But decades before, the medical education for African Americans was different. 2 black medical schools opened here in Memphis after the Civil War. The first was Hannibal Medical College in 1889, but it had 3 main problems. 1, people questioned whether its founder, Dr. Tarleton Cottrell, was even a doctor. But this newspaper article from 1888 says he was. The second problem is there are multiple documented locations for Hannibal Medical College, where the Hard Rock is on Bill, Madison Avenue, and Main Street. The third problem, as my aunt, physician and historian Dr. Anita Moncrief explains,
Hannibal gets the reputation of being a, quote, diploma mill, where people can just, sign up for classes. Nobody's teaching the classes, and after 2 years, they can get a diploma and saying that they're a doctor.
Leading to its official closing just 7 years later. In 1890, Dr. Miles Vanderhurst Link, born in Brownsville, Tennessee, to parents who were enslaved, started the University of West Tennessee in Jackson.
Him and his wife mortgaged their home to come up with the money to open their own black medical school.
The school became so big, it moved to Memphis in 1907.
I remember hearing about the medical school and that we had a school for black doctors.
The school worked with health facilities such as the Terrell Patterson Infirmary and the Jane Terrell Hospital.
It was something like reverent and sacred. You had to put on your best manners to even pass by it.
Dr. Link also started the Medical and Surgical Observer, the National Medical Association for African American Physicians, and the Bluff City Medical Society.
It was a prestigious club. It was all full of black doctors.
Still running today with Dr. LaTanya Washington as president.
My beginnings with Bluff City really go all the way back to medical school. On a day-to-day basis, I certainly recognize that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors.
Dr. Kimberly Brown is also a member.
It's amazing that you can still see that on down in 2020, that things are still going.
The University of West Tennessee graduated more black doctors than any other university at the time.
But the kiss of death for Dr. Link was the Flexner Report.
Abraham Flexner, who at the time had no medical background, was commissioned to survey all the medical schools in the country and decide which were worthy to continue. Despite the University of West Tennessee's good standing, Flexner recommended no one financially support it, leading to its closing in 1923. The Flexner Report closed 5 out of 7 black medical schools.
I think it's sorely missed. If the University of West Tennessee was here, I think things would be a lot different here in Memphis.
Today, there are just 4 black medical schools in the country. To find out how 15 others closed, visit our website, localmemphis.com. Brittany Moncrief, Local 24 News.
And as we share some of the colorful contributions to our society, you'll see how many efforts have changed the lives for generations to come.
And one woman was instrumental in the fight for civil rights by blasting the injustices through news outlets. Hear her story when we return. a pioneer, investigative journalist, and powerful crusader in the fight for justice right here in the Mid-South. We continue honoring our local Black history with Ida B. Wells.
Local 24 News reporter Rebecca Butcher spoke with a descendant of the activists and historians about how Memphis helped launch Wells' activism.
Well, she's internationally and nationally known as a crusader for justice. Ida B. Wells got her humble beginnings right here in Holly Springs.
She is my shero. To me, she's a humanitarian. She's a great humanitarian. A woman that was really willing to sacrifice everything.
Dr. Leona Harris is the executive director at the Ida B. Wells Burnett Museum in Holly Springs. Dr. Harris has dedicated the latter part of her life to making sure Wells is not forgotten. Wells, who was born a slave, is a heroine to many. Like any journey, it's best to begin at the beginning.
Here you got a kid, 4 years old, 5 years old, or so, have been taught to read.
And Wells wasn't reading children's books.
She was reading about the period of the time that was during the Reconstruction era.
Wells's parents died of yellow fever when she was just 16. She was left to raise her 5 siblings, and to support them, she became a teacher, eventually moving her brothers and sisters to the bustling city of Memphis. In mid-1800s, Wells refused to give up her train seat after buying a first-class ticket. We spoke to her great-grandson on the significance.
Looks like it happened once, and then she intentionally did it again to make a bigger scene and then sue the railroad.
According to the Hooks Institute's Daphne McFerrin,
Ida B. Wells sued. She won in the lower courts, but that was reversed, and she was devastated.
It was in Memphis where she'd leave one of her biggest marks.
She wrote as an editor for numerous papers in Memphis and throughout the country. This was for the Black press.
Which included the Memphis Free Speech newspaper, which was born in the basement of the historic First Baptist Church on Bill Street. Wells then turned her attention and resources to lynchings in the city.
She had a friend named Thomas Moss who operated a grocery store at what we call back then the Curve, which is really in the area of Lemoyne-on.
Moss and the store's co-owners, who were earning more than the white competition, were also arrested, then lynched without a trial.
Distinguished members of the community were killed for no reason other than that they were trying to economically empower themselves.
Suspected that she was intentionally out of town when she published the report,
using one of the first papers targeted to African Americans.
She was a genius in that respect of merging the statistical part of the number of people being lynched with the personal stories.
The personal stories of her descendants live on.
The assumption tends to be that we had intimate discussions about it from birth. And we actually didn't.
Dan Duster says his great-grandmother's impact didn't fully resonate with him until he got into college.
It's humbling because she did have things to lose, and she still, that's to me the test of courage.
And when asked what he believes her thoughts would be on where the Black community stands today,
Black Lives Matter movement, the fact that we still need it is crazy. To fight for the freedoms that we have, and for the voting rights and so forth, and for people still not to exercise those rights.
And without an Ida fighting for those rights for everyone, I couldn't tell you the story today. Rebecca Butcher, Local 24 News.
And decades ago, African Americans struggled to get quality education, but some decided to take a stand to integrate local school systems.
Tensions boiled over during the efforts to get those kids to classes. Some Memphians remember those days vividly. Hear their untold stories next.
You're watching Untold Stories, a look at local Black history.
School busing would prove to be a defining moment in Memphis with long remaining effects.
That's right. Local 24 News anchor Rudy Williams spoke with 2 well-known Memphians who, as children, found themselves at the center of the school busing controversy, for better or for worse.
There had never been widespread white protest against the civil rights movement until the busing era in Memphis.
The first time I was called, it was by a little white kid in this school right here.
Arthur Wayne Dowdy, a custodian of Memphis and Mid-South history, and Pastor Kenneth Whalum, who has served as an education commissioner, once upon a time as students, one black, one white, both among the first to be bused to schools as a result of school desegregation more than a decade before. University of Memphis law professor Daniel Kiel explains the history of the event that changed the course of history.
You have to go back to the idea of Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. The idea there was that students should not be assigned to schools simply based on the color of their skin.
The Supreme Court ruling meant that schools across the United States must break the cycle of separate but far too frequently unequal. The move to integrate schools following the High Court's ruling in the early 50s was slow, particularly in Memphis, with meager numbers of black students enrolling in white schools carrying on through the late 1960s.
So in 1971, the Supreme Court steps in and says busing is a viable tool to be used to achieve actual desegregation.
It was not a well-received mandate for many, especially white Memphians.
Everybody on my street left. I mean, when busing came, they were gone. Some moved back to West Tennessee. Some people moved farther east to be able to go to a county school to avoid going to school with African Americans.
As a fourth grader, bused to Goodlet Elementary in South Memphis, Dowdy remembers the tensions of the segregated South. Dowdy saw fresh vitriol brought on by busing.
There had been those who had violently opposed the sit-in demonstrations in 1960 and 61. There were young students who would sit in at lunch counters or at libraries or art museums or wherever who were beaten. So it was not as peaceful as people seem to pretend. Most whites in Memphis didn't like it, but they accepted it. But busing, for some reason, was different.
Mass resistance was expressed by whites who called themselves Citizens Against Busing and the subsequent Kids Against Busing, who held rallies where whole school buses were actually buried in the ground.
There was a school boycott when I was in second grade at Goodlet School where it was called White Monday.
For young Whalum, just finishing elementary school at the South Side's Hamilton, now being bused to Sherwood, great opportunity lay ahead.
We used to come and sit on the curb and look up into the sky and imagine what our lives are going to be, man. It was amazing.
Arguably, Shelby County schools are just as segregated now as they were in the 1960s, but Whalum and Dowdy see gains because of busing.
It wasn't a failure in its goal of eliminating separation and, by extension, discrimination.
The human component of it has transcended all of the negatives that grew out of it.
Rudy Williams, Local 24 News.
And many black music moguls started their rise to fame here in Memphis, and few recording companies are credited. One of them, Stax Records.
So what led to Stax's downfall? Find out when Untold Stories continues.
You're watching Untold Stories, a look at local black history.
And we now turn our attention to an effort to preserve history in what's described as the first community built for and by African Americans.
People who remember Orange Mound's oldest cemetery know there's much more to it than we see today. Instead of a small plot just along Park Avenue, this map shows what residents say is the real span of the cemetery, from Park Avenue up and around Saratoga Avenue and over to Grand Street.
According to the record books, the Dederick family plantation, established in the 1830s, enslaved at least 54 African Americans. It's believed that many are buried outside the iron fence that surrounds the grave sites of the Dederick relatives on Park Avenue. Historians and archaeologists recently found physical evidence of people buried there.
Now, more tests are scheduled for this spring with plans to erect a second historical marker recognizing those forgotten at the cemetery.
At the time, the Sights and Sounds of Soul, produced at a Memphis record label, took over music charts nationwide.
But Stax Records' star power was short-lived. Up next, see what is responsible for its downfall and what good came from it.
All right, when you think of Memphis, you probably think of music, especially back in the 1960s and 70s when Stax Records was in its prime.
Now, although the record company propelled the careers of many successful artists, it also struggled to stay afloat. Local 24 News weekend anchor Annette Pegler has the rise and fall of this legendary label.
Our first official recording there was in 1967.
Born directly across the street from Stax Records, James Alexander was in high school when he joined the band, the Barkays.
In those days, if a company was interested in a group, they would have them to come and audition live.
When Jim Stewart, the president of Stax Records, heard them, he wanted to hear more.
As we were playing, he said, "What's that?" He said, "Whatever it is, keep what you got right there." He ran up in the control room. 30 minutes later, we had a song called Soul Finger. That's how our career started, just like that.
That's how many Stax success stories from 1960 to 1975 started. Jim Stewart created the company and asked his sister Estelle Axton to partner with him. Years later, after struggling with distribution through Atlantic Records, Stewart recruited popular disc jockey Al Bell.
He said, "Well, we are $90,000 in the hole and about to go under. What we need is sales."
Bell had proven himself as a distributor in major markets like Washington, D.C. He led radio promotion at Stax before becoming part owner.
The two key writers at that time was Isaac Hayes and David Porter. They were great writers.
Bell also had a relationship with the folks at Motown.
He would tell me when the Temptations was going to be released, I would go into those 10 markets where I had a relationship and give the store owner a box of 30 records for free. When they come in and ask for the Temptations, while you go to look for the Temptations, play this Sam and Dave. And then that's how I would get the momentum started.
Johnny Taylor, Sam and Dave, and Albert King, and Rufus and Collins. The turmoil and stuff that was going on racially outside of the walls of Stax was not going on the inside of Stax.
Oh, she may be. Otis Redding recruited the Bar-Kays as his band.
One of the many things that we learned from Otis Redding was that, you definitely need to own your own music.
A plane crash in 1967 claimed the lives of Redding and all the original members of the Bar-Kays except Ben Cauley. James Alexander wasn't on the private jet.
I just happened to be one of the guys on the commercial flight that day. We had no system, it was no rhyme or reason.
Their distribution agreement with Atlantic Records ceased in 1968 and Stax was forced to reinvent itself.
Stax's contract with Atlantic said Atlantic owned the masters to the albums they distributed. That's when the financial problems really got bad. The company was sold to entertainment group Golf and Western.
That disturbed Mrs. Axton, because Mrs. Axton had, financed her home, and got a mortgage on it in order to build and move over here into this black neighborhood.
A short time later, Estelle Axton left Stax. Bills piled up, and Stax executives could not afford to pay their artists. In 1975, Stax finally closed its doors. The record company was being housed at the old Capitol Theater on East McLemore in the heart of South Memphis, but that building would soon be demolished.
He had park across the street and cry, because I would see an empty lot, with whiskey bottles on it, all kind of trash on it.
Southside Church of God in Christ bought the building from union planters for only $10. Stax reopened as a museum in 2003, adjacent to the Stax Academy, which opened 3 years earlier.
It's a great tourist attraction for Memphis, and people love what they see and feel in here because it reflects what we saw and felt as we came in making all of that great music, and it's alive and well today.
Annette Pegler, Local 24 News.
Are going to have to get down to the Stax Music Academy. That was pretty cool. If you enjoyed exploring lesser-known stories of Black history, go to our website, localmemphis.com, and click on the Black History category.
There you're going to find multiple additional stories from behind the scenes to rare exclusive interviews. Thank you for joining us and taking this journey with us. I'm Kelsey Cairns.
And I'm John Paul. From all of us here at Local 24 News, thanks for watching.